America's foreign policy is once again based on bipartisanship, on realism, strength, full partnership, and consultation with our allies, and constructive negotiation with potential adversaries. From the Middle East to Southern Africa to Geneva, American diplomats are taking the initiative to make peace and lower arms levels. We should be proud of our role as peacemakers.
That was Republican President Ronald Reagan, his 1983 State of the Union address. And here's Democratic President Bill Clinton 14 years later, his 1997 State of the Union address.
One of the greatest sources of our strength throughout the Cold War was a bipartisan foreign policy. Because our future was at stake, politics stopped at the water's edge.
Both presidents mentioned foreign policy. Both talked about bipartisan foreign policy, and both clips serve as important reminders that despite what the skeptics and the cynics say, State of the Union addresses do matter, because many of the hot foreign policy issues and crises America faces right now have been talked about for years and decades in State of the Union addresses. Hear those echoes and rhymes of America's foreign policy today in this episode of C-SPAN's podcast, Extreme Mortman. Countries and foreign leaders and hotspots in the news right now have shown up for years in State of the Union addresses, going back at least to the Carter administration. For instance, Iran. In 2026, Iran is in the news. And Iran was in the news in 1980 when President Jimmy Carter gave his final State of the Union address. At the time, Iran held 50 American captives. The speech came 2.5 months after the hostage crisis began.
In response to the abhorrent act in Iran, our nation has never been aroused and unified so greatly in peacetime. Our position is clear. The United States will not yield to blackmail. We continue to pursue these specific goals. First, to protect the present and long-range interests of the United States. Secondly, to preserve the lives of the American hostages and to secure as quickly as possible their safe release. If possible, to avoid bloodshed, which might further endanger the lives of our fellow citizens. To enlist the help of other nations in condemning this act of violence, which is shocking and violates the moral and the legal standards of a civilized world. And also to convince and to persuade the Iranian leaders that the real danger to their nation lies in the north, in the Soviet Union, and from the Soviet troops now in Afghanistan, and that the unwarranted Iranian quarrel with the United States hampers their response to this far greater danger to them. If the American hostages are harmed, a severe price will be paid.
When President Ronald Reagan gave his 1984 State of the Union address, we were deep in the Cold War. The U.S. was pitted against Russia, or as it was called then, the Soviet Union. But President Reagan's language was anything but aggressive.
Tonight, I want to speak to the people of the Soviet Union to tell them it's true that our governments have had serious differences, but our sons and daughters have never fought each other in war. And if we Americans have our way, they never will. People of the Soviet Union, there is only one sane policy for your country and mine to preserve our civilization in this modern age. A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. The only value in our two nations possessing nuclear weapons is to make sure they will never be used. But then, would it not be better to do away with them entirely?
Among those attending the speech in person, the Soviet ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Dobrynin. He sat in the diplomatic gallery in the House chamber. For most of the speech, no reaction. Ambassador Dobrynin just sat there in stony silence. But when President Reagan said a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought, Ambassador Dobrynin applauded. By the way, President Reagan gave his 1984 State of the Union address with its direct message for peace on January 25th. Within 2 weeks, on February 9th, Soviet leader Yuri Andropov, former head of the KGB, was dead. Vice President George Bush attended Andropov's funeral in Red Square. He brought a huge floral wreath bearing the inscription, written in Russian, "From the people of the United States." In 1992, President George Bush gave his own State of the Union address.
We gather tonight at a dramatic and deeply promising time in our history and in the history of man on earth. For in the past 12 months, the world has known changes of almost biblical proportions. And even now, months after the failed coup that doomed a failed system, I'm not sure we've absorbed the full impact, the full import of what happened. But communism died this year. And even as president with the most fascinating possible vantage point, there were times when I was so busy managing progress and helping to lead change that I didn't always show the joy that was in my heart. But the biggest thing that has happened in the world, in my life, in our lives, is this. By the grace of God, America won the Cold War.
Now a country very much in the news today, Ukraine. President Bill Clinton mentioned Ukraine in 3 of his State of the Union speeches. Here's 1998.
To meet these challenges, we are helping to write international rules of the road for the 21st century, protecting those who join the family of nations and isolating those who do not. Within days, I will ask the Senate for its advice and consent to make Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic the newest members of NATO. For 50 years, NATO contained communism and kept America and Europe secure. Now, these 3 formerly communist countries have said yes to democracy. I ask the Senate to say yes to them, our new allies. By taking in new members and working closely with new partners, including Russia and Ukraine, NATO can help to assure that Europe is a stronghold for peace in the 21st century.
Also very much in the news today, Hamas. 4 different State of the Union addresses have included specific mentions of Hamas. One of those speeches was by President Biden, and the other 3 speeches were from President George W. Bush. Here's 2006.
Raising up a democracy requires the rule of law, protection of minorities, and strong, accountable institutions that last longer than a single vote. The great people of Egypt have voted in a multi-party presidential election, and now their government should open paths of peaceful opposition that will reduce the appeal of radicalism. The Palestinian people have voted in elections, and now the leaders of Hamas must recognize Israel, disarm, reject terrorism, and work for lasting peace.
One more clip from that speech by President Bush 20 years ago. We heard President Reagan in 1984 say, "Tonight I want to speak to the people of the Soviet Union." In 2006, President Bush spoke to the people of a different country.
Tonight, let me speak directly to the citizens of Iran. America respects you, and we respect your country. We respect your right to choose your own future and win your own freedom. And our nation hopes one day to be the closest of friends with a free and democratic Iran.
By the way, has that rhetorical device, speaking directly to the citizens of a different country, been used yet another time in a State of the Union address? Well, yes. Same country, same president, 1 year earlier.
And to the Iranian people, I say tonight, as you stand for your own liberty, America stands with you.
Next, 10 years later, President Barack Obama, 2015. It's the first appearance in a State of the Union address by someone we talk about all the time today, Vladimir Putin.
We're demonstrating the power of American strength and diplomacy. We're upholding the principle that bigger nations can't bully the small by opposing Russian aggression and supporting Ukraine's democracy and reassuring our NATO allies. Last year, as we were doing the hard work of imposing sanctions, along with our allies, as we were reinforcing our presence with the frontline states, Mr. Putin's aggression, it was suggested, was a masterful display of strategy and strength. That's what I heard from some folks. Well, today, it is America that stands strong and united with our allies, while Russia is isolated with its economy in tatters. That's how America leads, not with bluster, but with persistent, steady resolve.
Which brings us to President Trump, talking foreign policy and Venezuela and the end of Nicolas Maduro. The 2026 State of the Union address? Nope, not yet. Here's President Trump in 2020.
We are supporting the hopes of Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans to restore democracy. The United States is leading a 59-nation diplomatic coalition against the socialist dictator of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. Maduro is an illegitimate ruler, a tyrant who brutalizes his people, but Maduro's grip on tyranny will be smashed and broken. Here this evening is a very brave man who carries with him the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of all Venezuelans. Joining us in the gallery is the true and legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido. Mr. President, please take this message back to your family. Thank you, Mr. President. Great honor. Thank you very much. Please take this message back that all Americans are united with the Venezuelan people in their righteous struggle for freedom. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
And a footnote to that clip, at the end of President Trump's 2020 State of the Union address, Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi famously and angrily and dramatically ripped up her copy of the text. But in that Venezuela clip, when President Trump talked about removing Maduro, Speaker Pelosi stood up and applauded. Finally, one more hotspot still in the news, Gaza. Here is President Biden, 2024.
A temporary pier will enable a massive increase in the amount of humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza every day. And Israel must do its part. Israel must allow more aid into Gaza to ensure humanitarian workers aren't caught in the crossfire. And they're announcing they're going to have a crossing in northern Gaza. To the leadership of Israel, I say this: humanitarian assistance cannot be a secondary consideration or a bargaining chip. Protecting and saving innocent lives has to be a priority. As we look to the future, the only real solution to the situation is a two-state solution over time.
And a historical footnote to why State of the Union speeches matter, or at least for foreign policy. We open with President Reagan in 1983. Let's go 20 years earlier. 1963, here's President John F. Kennedy.
In the world beyond our borders, steady progress has been made in building a world of order. The people of West Berlin remain free and secure. A settlement, though still precarious, has been reached in Laos. The spear point of aggression has been blunted in South Vietnam.
President Kennedy's assertion that aggression has been blunted in Vietnam is notable. U.S. combat troops officially left Vietnam 10 years later. The end of direct American military involvement in the Vietnam War came on March 29, 1973. 2 years after that, Saigon fell. It was 3 presidents after JFK. Oh, and one more historical footnote regarding State of the Union addresses and foreign policy and countries in the news right now. Denmark. There have been 39 specific mentions of Denmark going back to 1811 and President James Madison. Most recently, 2004 and President Bush. But what about Greenland? So far, no president has ever mentioned Greenland in the State of the Union address. Yet another reason to pay attention to this year's speech. And now a bonus clip. We've heard America's leaders talking to the U.S. Congress about Iran. But what about Iran's leaders talking to the U.S. Congress about Iran? Well, that has happened. April 12, 1962, a joint meeting of Congress. Here's Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran.
America gave us generous and valuable financial and military assistance, thus greatly facilitating our task in the implementation of our vast economic and general development and security plans, for which I wish to express to you our deep gratitude and sincerest thanks. We are absolutely certain that the freedom and security of peoples around the world, as well as your own security, depend upon the will and determination of the American people to continue with the struggle without flagging. We hope that you decide, as you have in the past, that it is worthwhile. But I can assure you that whatever your decision may be, that the people of Iran have not maintained their freedom for 2,500 years in order to now surrender.
And now a rare second bonus clip, returning to President Bush's 1993 State of the Union address. In his single term, President Bush kept busy with foreign policy, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, the expansion of NATO, German reunification, the signing of START I and START II, the invasion of Panama to capture Manuel Noriega, and the Gulf War. He even scored a State of the Union opening laugh based on foreign policy, from the most unlikely of sources, Japan and vomit. Visiting Japan in early 1992, President Bush threw up on the trousers of the Japanese Prime Minister. And that's how he opened his 1992 State of the Union address.
You know, with the big build-up this address has had, I want to make sure it'd be a big hit, but I couldn't convince Barbara to deliver it for me. I see the Speaker and the Vice President are laughing. They saw what I did in Japan. And they're just happy they're sitting behind me.
That's it for this episode of C-SPAN's Extreme Mortman. A reminder to watch President Trump's 2026 State of the Union address on C-SPAN and listen on C-SPAN radio and the Democratic response as well. Because if the past is any guide, the foreign policy we hear now may be with us for a long time. Meantime, check out C-SPAN's website to find video of presidents delivering State of the Union addresses, going back to President Franklin Roosevelt, January 6, 1942. It was FDR's first State of the Union address during wartime.
We are fighting to cleanse the world of ancient evils, ancient ills. Our enemies are guided by brutal cynicism, by unholy contempt for the human race. We are inspired by a faith that goes back through all the years to the first chapter of the book of Genesis. God created man in his own image. We on our side are striving to be true to that divine heritage. We are fighting, as our fathers have fought, to uphold the doctrine that all men are equal in the sight of God. Those on the other side are striving to destroy this deep belief and to create a world in their own image, a world of tyranny and cruelty and serfdom. That is the conflict that day and night now pervades our lives. No compromise can end that conflict. There never has been, there never can be successful compromise between good and evil. Only total victory can reward the champions of tolerance and decency and freedom and faith.